In this video I'm going to discuss exposure. Now first of all, exposure is simply how bright or how dark your image is. And what you're generally looking for is something that reflects what you actually see at the time. Back in the days of film it was a bit of guesswork and you had to use your brain to try and figure what was happening in a situation and whether your camera metering was going to actually correctly expose it. Luckily, with digital cameras we have a fail-safe way of actually checking this exposure, and that's by using something called a histogram. Now I've set my camera up here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the histogram and show you exactly what the histogram means and what you can change on your camera using exposure compensation. Here we have the shot set up, and you will see this little box here, and that's called the histogram. Now I'm just going to take the shot. You will see the histogram displayed next to your shot. The top one is just recording all the light levels effectively. The left hand side of the box is showing the dark areas within the image, and the right hand side of the box is showing the bright areas. So there, if you look at it, you'll see the left hand side, we've got a grouping starting off in the darks, which I would have thought are these areas here, the sort of shadow areas. Then you're coming up and you've got a lot of mid-tones going. Then towards the right hand side you will see there's just a very slight grouping up towards the right and where it gradually comes off. Now that's the light areas or the whites. Now if you look at the shot, there's actually not that many bright areas, there's nothing white particularly. Now what's important to understand is that your camera meters for a mid-tone grey. So effectively that means your camera thinks the scene in front of it is grey and it's going to try and produce an exposure based on your scene being grey. Now using exposure compensation I'm going to knock it extremely down, but you know it's pretty obvious that is drastically underexposed. Let's do 2 stops. 1 stop. Back to where the camera thinks it should be. And now let's start overexposing it. Now one thing to note at the moment is that you will see that it's not quite hitting the right hand side because there's nothing white within the scene. Now if we take it to a stopover, all of a sudden it's a lot brighter, which you may actually prefer. A lot of it is down to your own self-preference until you get to this point. Can you see all these areas around here which are all flashing? What that is telling us, and this is something called highlight warnings, is that effectively all information has been lost in these points. It's overexposed and there's absolutely no data being recorded. Now if we were to take that back into the digital darkroom, Photoshop Lightroom for example, and try to bring the exposure back down, these would all go to mucky tones because there's no detail there at all. So the key is to try and expose to the point where they disappear. So I'm going to bring it back down. It's still there. Back down again. Still flashing. A bit more. Just got the odd little speck, which isn't too much to worry about really, to be honest. And that is your optimum exposure. We've got a nice distribution going straight from the left hand side and the darks all the way up, straight up to the mid-tones and slightly past the mid-tones, somewhere between the mid-tones and the highlights, which makes sense because the rocks are actually quite light, and then rolling off nicely. Now with that file we can be confident that we can take it away and we can process the raw file, and we can then adjust the exposure to whatever we feel is better to create a final image. Or if we were shooting in JPEGs, we know we've got the maximum amount of information there, we've lost nothing at all, and that we can make it slightly darker if we want to. So as you can see, it's a very simple process, and it's really just a case of reviewing your histogram all the time on your camera. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you'd like to see more tutorials from the 5-Minute Photo School, please do consider subscribing to the channel.